What is up, guys? Welcome to my early review of Season 1 of Daredevil Born Again, kind of also known as Daredevil Season 4. So for those that may not know, about a decade ago, Netflix had a string of TV series that were based on Marvel characters that were loosely supposed to be in the same universe as the Marvel Cinematic Universe, but they never completely converged together. So you had Daredevil, you had Jessica Jones, you had Luke Cage, and then you had Iron Fist. And eventually they all came together for like an Avengers-style season of The Defenders. And of all of those shows, by a landslide, the one that I enjoyed the most and the one that pretty much everybody else enjoyed the most was Daredevil. For a lot of us, that was the greatest comic book TV series that had ever been created. It was dark, it was gritty, it was mature, there was outstanding fight scenes, there was phenomenal acting, and for me, this third season of that show was the best at that point, which was right before they unceremoniously canceled that entire Netflix Marvel universe. And so for almost 7 years, that show has just been kind of out there floating in the Marvel ether. Fans have been wondering, begging, speculating if they were ever going to bring these characters and these actors back and fully integrate them into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. And a couple of years ago, they finally announced that they absolutely were doing that. And then immediately fans rejoiced, just to be really nervous and upset and angry again when they found out through a series of announcements that the new version of this Daredevil that was going to be bringing over Charlie Cox and Vincent D'Onofrio and presumably even more characters and actors from that Netflix series was not actually going to continue that show. It was going to be something completely rebooted and different, but just have all the borrowed fan trust because of the faces that we knew from that previous version. And so everybody got upset. Eventually, there was some leadership changes, and they went back, scrapped the entire show, which they shot a good bit of it, and went back to the drawing board and did something that was actually going to be a continuation of those first 3 seasons of Daredevil, while being this little onboard ramp for new fans and for Daredevil's entrance into the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Well, if you're watching this video, that means that the first 2 episodes have dropped right now on Disney+. They're going to be doing weekly releases after that, going all the way through to the beginning of April. It's a 9-episode season, but I was lucky enough to be able to check out the entire season, and so I'm going to give you my completely spoiler-free impressions of Daredevil Born Again. And the first thing that I will say is that by a country mile, this is the best Marvel Disney Plus show that they have ever done. Now, keep in mind, I have not really been positive on any of their Marvel shows. Even something like WandaVision that got a lot of acclaim, I was very mixed on that. Every other show that I have watched, I have ended up being negative by the end of it. Now, there's about 3 or 4 of them that I have not watched, but all the ones that I've neglected to watch have not been received very well, so I don't think I'm missing anything. So with that being said, it's not exactly a high bar, but even with a low bar, this is a really, really good show that is mostly a return to form to what we expect from the Netflix series. And I'll get into all the reasons why I said mostly. I think this show has the best collection of actors and the best collection of characters of any of the Disney Plus shows by far. I think that the narrative structure of it is much better. It's much better paced out, having 9 episodes that are all 45 minutes to 55 minutes long versus that weird structure that they've been having where it's like 5 to 6 episodes and some of them are 20, 30 minutes long. You get a lot more time to breathe, a lot more time to live in this world, a lot more time to develop out characters and spend time on side plots and little episodic storylines while still having this very big narrative through line that goes from episode 1 to episode 9. And even the way that they structured these episodes, it was a lot like Cobra Kai for me, where they start the episode up and, you know, I'm always interested in what is going on, and they always found a way to leave off that episode introducing some new piece of information or showing some visual or teasing something that made me immediately want to click on the next episode. If I had more time, I could have very easily have watched all 9 of these episodes in one sitting. And that is far and away more than an experience that I've had with any other Disney Plus show where it almost felt like obligation to finish more than actual enjoyment. And diving into all of that, of course, we got Charlie Cox back as Matt Murdock or Daredevil, and then you have Vincent D'Onofrio back as Kingpin, Wilson Fisk. And they are the two titans. They are the two stars of this show, always have been. Of course, we have the side characters that we love, but those are the two linchpins of that original Daredevil series. And they're both phenomenal here. You can tell they were dying to get back to these characters. You can tell that they were wanting to come back with a vengeance. Charlie Cox just brings so much humility to the character of Matt Murdock, while also having that rage and, you know, some of that Catholic guilt and all those different themes that are so integral to the character of Daredevil. Very good in the physicality and everything as well. Has a lot of charm and a lot of great chemistry with not only our older returning characters, but a cast of mostly brand new side characters. And Vincent D'Onofrio as Kingpin, man, one of the best comic book on-screen villains of all time. Not only I just love him as an actor, his eccentricities always just make me laugh. The way that he talks his Fisk and has little facial expressions and stuff. I just think he's such a wild, I wouldn't even say subtle, but just like a nuanced actor where he just creates a character in so many different ways besides just, you know, putting on a suit and being a big bald guy to be Kingpin. Like, he embodies so many different things that is just so fun to watch. And his character especially is in a very different place in this show. Now, I did not watch Echo or Hawkeye, so I kind of had to watch like a recap to catch up on the couple little appearances that he's had in the MCU thus far. I don't think you necessarily need to, because they don't make this show something that you have to do a lot of homework with, aside from watching the first 3 seasons of Daredevil, obviously. But he's in a very different place where, of course, we expect he's still the Kingpin. We expect he's still this murderous, evil person who's probably going to snap at some point. But he's trying to lead a different path. He's trying to somewhat make up for the wrongs of the past. He's running for mayor of New York. And so while you know it's still at its heart going to be about Daredevil versus Kingpin at some point, they're on a path where they're not really at odds with each other. They're not on each other's war path for the majority of this season. It really changed up that dynamic quite a bit from what we knew from the first 3 seasons. And I really enjoyed seeing D'Onofrio especially try to bring this new like political side to his character that before was just like this hulking evil beast. And something that I really enjoyed about the way that they structured the narrative of this season is that they very much give D'Onofrio and Kingpin like the season-long focus. Like, that's the main arc of this season that is dealing with his run for mayor and this task force that he's trying to assemble to try to wipe out vigilantism. And then you have, of course, you have themes and you have like an internal conflict that is season long with Matt Murdock and Daredevil, but Daredevil gets much more of the episodic focus. And Matt Murdock, as a lawyer especially, gets a lot more of the episodic focus of the season. So it feels very much like you have this season-long running arc and these conflicts that we're building towards some kind of a climax with. But there's plenty of times where we go off into these little side stories and we introduce new side characters. And there's a whole episode where Matt Murdock's trying to stop a bank that's almost like a completely isolated episode. And it works together really well to have something that keeps your attention, that wants you to keep watching to figure out the answers and see where things are going to go, but also having that quality where you can watch this week to week and be totally entertained and satisfied with what that 45 to 55 minute story arc was. Something that I especially was not only shocked, but very, very pleasantly surprised that they not only kept, but I think maybe even dialed it up a bit in certain scenes, was the maturity of the Daredevil property. I think alongside Deadpool and Wolverine, this is easily the most mature thing that Disney has ever done with their Marvel properties. There are really, really violent scenes. I mean, there's one towards the end of the season that I literally, my eyes were like this. I was like, holy shit, they just did that? Carnage Candy, bitch, hell yes. But even the fight scenes are, you know, they're raw, they're bloody like they used to be, like you want them to be. There is a lot of language in the show. I mean, there's F-bombs left and right, which, you know, some will say, is that necessary? I'm going to say, fuck yes, it is. But I like the fact that they kept this thing very much an R-rated show. Now, I'm not going to say that it's quite as dark and gritty as the Netflix series, because I don't think it is, and I'll get into that a little bit later. But as far as keeping the maturity, keeping that edge, keeping that grit that we really want with this character, they did. They did not sanitize this at all for the Disney brand. This is something that is very much outside of their comfort zone, And within the same year or so that we had Deadpool and Wolverine, and now this, I'm glad that Marvel is actually starting to take some chances and give some more mature stuff because it's time. And some stories and characters necessitate that. Hello? Blade, anybody? And I saw a tweet going around a couple of days ago from somebody that had clearly seen the entire season in a screener the way that I did, where they said they were disappointed in how much this version of the show has completely done without all of the Catholic themes and all of the more introspective turmoil of the character of Matt Murdock. And I don't know what show they watched, because I think that stuff is still very much present, and it's also something that I really enjoyed about this. I don't think that Catholicism is as much of a visual piece of this version of Daredevil, but very much that is the internal arc of Matt Murdock during this season. Not saying too much, but there's something that happens to kick off this season that sets him on a path where he is very much at odds with himself, and he is very much toying with who he actually is and who he wants to be. And it all goes back to all of those Catholicism themes from the first 3 seasons that is so integral to his character, with, measuring the difference between vengeance and justice and having that humility in there. And while there is one element of that I'll take issue with a little bit later, they're very much due to Charlie Cox's ability to just embody this character and give a really great performance. That is totally omnipresent all the way through this season with his character. And it is something that, to a certain degree, we've gone through with this character before, but it's at its largest. It's at its most turmoil during this season, where he literally is at a crossroads of, if I go this path, I will never be the same, but maybe it's for the better, or do I stick on this path and continue to potentially let justice not be served, but I'll lose myself. It's a central theme to characters like this that are darker, just like Batman, but there's a reason, because it works. So overall, what I will say, just to kind of close out my positives on this show, is that if you were a fan of Daredevil, I can almost guarantee you're going to like this show. You may not like it as much as the Netflix run, and I'm going to get into all the reasons why here in a second, but for the most part, I think they do a great job at recapturing what a lot of us loved about that show, while very much having their own path cut, very much having this show be its own thing, have some tonal differences, certainly have some stylistic differences that fit more with the overall universe. And I think that compromise is necessary if we want to see more with this character, especially in this world. So overall, I was pretty pleased with what they did. And if they had season 2 come out today, I would be clicking play on it tonight. Now, with all that being said, as I get into my mixed, I think that something that is very, very important when you walk into this series is to manage your expectations. And I mean a lot of different things when I say that. As I've already hinted at numerous times, this is not a one-for-one transfer from what you know from Netflix. The Netflix run was certainly darker in its look. It was certainly a bit grittier with its look. I think that it's a lot more bright and digital and clean the way that it looks, and that absolutely does make a difference. I don't think it necessarily benefits the show, but I also don't think it's like this disastrous change at the same time. You also need to manage your expectations on how much Daredevil is in Daredevil Born Again. This season is much more of a Matt Murdock story than a Daredevil story. So don't click play on episode 1 expecting to have 9 episodes of Daredevil swinging through Hell's Kitchen kicking ass, because that is not what this season is at all. Most of the focus is actually more of like a court procedural, which is really enjoyable. Now, there is action, there is violence, there is definitely those Daredevil elements that we want throughout the season, but it's not a 9-episode, kick-ass fest at all. Also, you need to manage your expectations with how much focus and how much time we get with our returning side characters. And I am not hinting at anybody's fate or anything like that with that, so please do not hit me with spoiler bullshit. All I'm saying is, despite the trailer showing Matt Murdock and Daredevil interacting with a lot of those characters that we love from season 1 through 3, most of those characters are sidelined for the majority of the middle of this season and seem to be set up to have a much bigger role going forward. So eventually, we will probably get back to our comfort zone of having all these characters be the focus. But for this season and for the story that they're telling with Matt Murdock, He's very much in a different place with a very different set of characters for the majority of the season. Now moving on to my actual mixed elements, and I already kind of talked about one, and that's the overall look of the show. I do prefer the darker, grittier look of the Netflix series. I think it fits the character and it fits the tone of the show more. Not to say that there's a tonal clash with the more brighter look that we have with this Disney Plus version, but I would have preferred it if they kept that look of it a lot more. I understand why they felt like they had to brighten it up a bit and have the digital look. It's just more fitting of the visual template, I guess, of the MCU. And as I said, it's in the mix. It's not something that killed it for me. It's not like a gigantic issue every time I click play in an episode, but I very much prefer the darker look to what we have now. I was also very mixed on the new set of side characters. A lot of them I enjoyed quite a bit in the first half of the season, and then some of them kind of started to grit on my nerves a little bit with some of their character decisions and the way that they started to view and kind of be a little antagonistic with Matt. And then other ones are just kind of like fill-ins for Foggy and Karen while they're in the background doing something else, and I just don't think they're as captivating or as fun or have as good of a dynamic with Charlie Cox as Foggy and Karen do. So that's one of the things that I'm trying to say, like, to manage your expectations. That group of three dynamic is sidelined quite a bit, and they didn't replace it with anything that's better. I think these characters might have room to breathe in season 2 onward, where I'll start to like them more, assuming that they do stick around. But with so much of this show having that focus on the courtroom stuff, I just missed some of that interaction of our classic characters, and I look forward to hopefully getting more of that in the future. And kind of tied up in that same point, I'm not really sure how I feel about the decision of taking characters that we loved from that original run and kind of sidelining them for a majority of this season. I understand, again, why narratively they wanted to do that for Matt's character arc and what he's going through and that inner turmoil, but there's a reason why in the original version of this show that they eventually scrapped, when fans found out that Foggy and Karen weren't even going to be a part of it, people lost their shit because they are a major piece of this show. So it kind of felt like a compromise. Like they really didn't want to do anything with Karen or Foggy this season, yet they wanted to have them back just to kind of appease the fans. And I don't know if a lot of fans are going to be totally happy with that compromise, because that dynamic is a very important piece of this show. And it just felt like something like that was, it was very tangibly missing during these 9 episodes. The other thing, which it really doesn't show its head much. So it's not necessarily something that is like this omnipresent issue that they keep having to deal with. But I do think, despite understanding 100% why they were doing it, Daredevil and Kingpin, especially the versions that we know of from that Netflix series, being shoved into the rules of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, it doesn't completely make sense to me. Now, like, there's barely any mention of the greater universe in this show. You know, there's a couple of little quick references or whatever, but when you think about how dark and grounded and street level Daredevil is, while there's alien invasions and Thanos and people being snapped and all of the stuff coming down the pipe with Celestials and everything right now in the same universe, I don't know, something about that just feels odd to me. It's like a square peg in a round hole situation where, again, the show does not draw attention to it, and I think they were wise to do that. And for most people, it's not going to be an issue whatsoever, and this probably is just a nitpick. But it just feels odd. You know, it feels weird that Daredevil and Kingpin are doing their own little thing. Meanwhile, Spider-Man's supposed to be flying around the same exact city who just went to fucking space last week. It's just part of the problem of having a universe this big that's been going on that long. You know, the certain characters might fit that way in the comics and nobody asks any questions. In a cinematic medium, it's a little harder to stomach. It's one of the reasons why I think they haven't been able to get Blade off the ground, because it's like, how do we have Blade and vampires in the same universe as Iron Man and Thor and not have this be absolutely ridiculous? I wouldn't want that job figuring that shit out. And now with all that said, let's move on to the negatives. And this first one is going to be a big one for a lot of people. I don't think the action is anywhere near as good as the original Daredevil run. If we did not have those first 3 seasons to compare this to, this would not be in my negatives. I'd be like, okay, that action was solid, some pretty good fight scenes and whatever. Like, okay, that was fun. But when that was one of the biggest and best elements of the Netflix run, gritty, in-camera, practical, one-shot even, hand-to-hand action sequences. Real actors, real stunt workers kicking each other's ass. There are so many moments in season 1, 2, and 3 that are like these standout, some of the best comic book fight scenes of all time. You have nothing like that in Daredevil Born Again. The biggest fight sequence that we have that is kind of like their attempt at doing their version of the hallway scene from season 1. Every season of Daredevil had like a big fight sequence that was like their big premiere moment. This season has something like that, and it is so obviously digital that it honestly doesn't even look like Daredevil and the person that he's fighting is in the same space as everything else. Like it's a one-shot sequence where you have extras, you have multiple rooms, the camera's moving around, but the two people who are in the forefront of that sequence who are punching each other really look like they're on green screen and they're put into this sequence. Now, I don't know the behind the scenes. Maybe that's wrong. Maybe they shot this all practically, but I'm telling you, there are so many bits of it that just look fake. It looks bouncy. It looks digital. It's not near this bad, but like compare it to Blade 2 and some of the fight sequences where they just look kind of spongy. And that's the way that that fight scene looked. And then you have other fight sequences that aren't nearly as digital as that, but you still have kind of the overly comic booky flippy stuff that Daredevil has done in like She-Hulk and where he's showed up in the MCU so far that is just not as good. It's not as exciting. It's not as impressive. It's not as bare knuckle as the stuff that we got in the Netflix series. And so that was a major disappointment for me. And there's one sequence that literally opens up this season. And I texted Sean. I was like 10 minutes into the season. I was like, hey, I just clicked play. I don't know how far you are, but like, please tell me the fighting gets better. And he basically said, yeah, I'm not a fan of the digital fighting either. And I was like, oh my God. Oh, why? So again, this is part of managing your expectations. I'm not saying the action in this show is bad, because it's not. Some of it's actually pretty good. Some of it's very gritty and bloody and all that. It gets better as it goes along, where it's not quite as high concept as the one-shot sequence I'm talking about. But you take all the fight scenes in this season and put them together, and they don't compare to one of the best sequences of the Netflix series. And that is just a major blow for me, because that was one of the best and most memorable, most celebrated elements of that original show. Why they wouldn't do everything they could to recreate that is beyond me. Another element that I thought they really dropped the ball on is, while I enjoy the central themes to this season and the central conflict of Matt Murdock's character, the inciting incident in episode 1 that sets him on this path, I think they completely half-assed it. I don't want to give too many details, but you have this internal struggle that characters like Daredevil and Batman always have about how far they can go. What is the line that they won't cross? And they essentially try to put Daredevil in a place where he has crossed that line, but not really. And the not really part really pissed me off, because it's like, if you're going to do that, if you're going to go bold and give our character this really massive internal struggle that they have never dealt with before in the previous seasons that we have seen this character, then fucking go there. Don't get cold feet. And so the way that they kind of did that and then immediately undid it, I feel like it undercut the power of that entire story arc this season, the entire character arc of this season, where there's certain things that Matt Murdock will not do throughout the season, even though it's like, you need to fucking do something. And he's like, I can't, because I went too far last time. And I'm like, but you fucking didn't. You didn't. You didn't. And it was such a simple fix to just have him go all the way. Don't get blue balls, and that problem goes away. And every time he has that internal struggle, I'm like, yeah, I get it. I get it, because, yeah, episode 1, yeah, that was a dark place, buddy. And the last thing that I'll say in the negatives, and this is a small negative, it's bordering on being a mix, but it is something that by the end did leave me in kind of a bit of a negative emotion, so I'm sticking it here. I think this season does a much better job than every other series of Disney Plus Marvel stuff that I've seen, in a sense of, it doesn't feel like we're meandering around and then all of a sudden we're like rushing the last 2 episodes to get to an ending, and it's so unsatisfying. They let things breathe much better here, as I've already said. But when you get to the very end of this season, I do still feel like it kind of came to a close a little quick. I felt like there was at least one more episode of something there. And so by the end of it, the whole narrative structure of this season really feels more like a setup for what's going to be a much bigger season 2. And so where characters and storylines find their close by the end of episode 9, a lot of it felt like a bit of blue balls to me. Not like a tease for the next season like traditional TV shows do, where it's like, of course, there's more story to tell. Did you think we were going to end here? There was just not enough resolution to the season-long arc of these characters and the season-long narrative. It felt like a lot of things left lingering for the future. And I don't like that when a series does that. You got to close out a majority of what you've been doing for that season and leave tail threads, of course. Leave certain things lingering. Have some cliffhangers or whatever to leave us, something to chew on until the next season comes out. But I just felt like too much of it was left hanging for season 2. It's an exciting place to leave things, and I'm very interested and very excited. As I said, if season 2 came out today, I'd be click and play on that bitch, but it's not. It's going to be a year at least, and so that's very frustrating for me to watch 9 episodes of a show and be like, okay, I feel very unresolved. So overall, guys, I really enjoyed this show. I don't quite think it reaches anywhere near the highs of the Daredevil Netflix series, but it certainly is a worthy successor. And it's certainly something that is a nice compromise between what we expect from that previous series, what we want to see, and pushing the show and the characters into new, unfound territory that I'm excited to see them go in. Not a perfect recreation, not a perfect one-for-one transfer. I think some fans are going to be more upset than me. Some fans are going to be more forgiving than me. But overall, if you're a fan of Daredevil, I think the show is absolutely worth your time, and I think for the most part, you'll be happy with the majority of what they do. Well, that's it for this one, guys. If you enjoyed that, click over here for all of my 2025 new release reviews, and I'm also going to put Captain America Brave New Worlds review up here if you're just a Marvel fan in general. Like, share, hit that subscribe button so you don't miss everything in the future, and as always, remember, opinions are like assholes, but that doesn't mean you have to be.